Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show.
It's Brian O'Neill, and today on with Dr. Christian Koff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Dr. Koff, thanks for joining us.
It's great to talk to you, Brian.
Dr. Koff, wanted to get your thoughts on President Obama wanting to use military ground force against ISIL.
Well, I mean, there are two issues here. One, he doesn't want to have a war in the Near East. On the other hand, there is no way to meet the threat without land forces. You can degrade by bombing, but you can't conquer, you can't defeat without people on the ground. That's just the nature of warfare, the nature of space, and the nature of human beings. And I think it's understandable that he's been slowly moved to this situation after the catastrophic collapse of his foreign policy. The thing that bothers me is I don't think the Republicans were elected in the last election to give him more power. And to the extent that they come in and there's talk about giving him fast-track authority in signing free trade treaties, which he doesn't have to go through Congress, or rather Congress can vote it up and down without making changes. Now he's going to be given authority to make war in the Near East, where he ran his entire campaign and his entire administration so far on the thesis that he's the guy who's going to keep us out of war in the Near East. And I just think the Republicans are making a mistake to brand themselves as people whose main job is to give this president more power.
Do you see Rand Paul stepping up on this one?
Yes, I expect he sees this as the chance of a lifetime. That this is the one area where he can break out of the libertarian circle that he's in, because a lot of his positions appeal to libertarians, but really not to that many other people, and certainly not to other conservatives, and stand up to a large number of, if you want me to call them, Pat Buchanan conservatives, the old-fashioned conservatives who didn't want us involved in Europe, didn't want us involved in European wars. Now it's Near Eastern wars. A lot of Americans still think our job is to keep our own country free, and that isn't very easy. That isn't an easy thing. That isn't a given. And to give this particular president all this kind of authority, and then a 3-year limit, so that he gets. By the way, we don't even know what he's going to spend the money on. He usually, when they've made these deals on the budget, he just goes and spends the money on campaigning and his favorite topics. He doesn't keep it authorized for particular areas. So we don't even know what he'll spend the money on. But the situation is a bad one, but the precise situation isn't very clear. And meanwhile, he's openly considering sending arms to the Ukraine and getting involved in a war there. And it was quite striking when he met with the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, who ostentatiously spoke German, and her first words were, "Der französische Präsident und ich," the French president and I have decided. This was just after a 2-hour meeting with the President of the United States. I mean, it was quite an impressive display, since nobody knows a foreign language in the press corps. No one gets the fact that the first thing you say after you've met with the President of the United States for a couple of hours is, "The French President and I have decided," and which in other words to continue negotiations. So if the Republicans go along with the president, and it's there's a good chance that they will, and certainly the war hawks on Fox News are certainly beating the drum for it, that he'll end his administration with 2 wars, one in the Near East and one in the Ukraine. And this was what George Bush got beaten over the head for, was that we were in Afghanistan, we were in Iraq, what are we doing? What's the exit strategy? And there wasn't, I don't say there wasn't one in Bush's case, Vice President Cheney's case, maybe more accurately, I think there was, but it wasn't clear to people. In the case of Obama, it is clear that he's making this up week after week.
Chris, you talked about the pressure from Fox on the president. How much of an influence do you think that the Rush Limbaughs and the Fox News Sean Hannity. How much do you think that group influences the president in terms of his decision making? Obviously, he's opposed to them, but it is always the case when you're at that level of politics, or even maybe lower level politics, that your opponent, what your opponents are going to say is always in the back of your mind.
There's one issue that you've just correctly brought up, that in any political situation, you're, in one sense, listening to your opponents more carefully than the guys on your side because you think you already understand them. Secondly, there's the fact that he's the most thin-skinned president we've ever had. It's just, he just can't take any criticism of any sort, can't admit he's wrong on anything. His former advisor, David Axelrod, just has published a book about him, and one of the very interesting stories is when this backfired, he's used to putting pressure on people to criticize him, and Maureen Dowd, who writes for the leftist New York Times, had written a mild criticism of some things he'd done, and he came down on her like gangbusters. And the effect, unfortunately, was that Dowd then began remorselessly over the past 3 or 4 years to attack him, especially on his personality, all the things she knows really gets to him. Of course, the New York Times is protected by one of the wealthiest men in the world, Carlos Slim of Mexico, who pays for their deficit. So there's no way he could get to her. Carlos Slim doesn't care what Obama. He's an international wealthy person like George Soros, very much like George Soros. And the result was that, week after week, certainly month after month, not always week after week, but month after month, Maureen Dowd kept going after him, and it drove him crazy because he's so sensitive. So yes, he listens to Fox News, and he would love to show them that, I'm the macho man, and I can stand up to it. And, Colonel Peters, I'll stick it to you, sir. He would love to do that. Let's hope he's not basing his foreign policy, however, on sticking it to Fox News. I fear, however, that is one factor in his decision-making.
That's an interesting observation. They were playing on Kilmeade and Friends, Brian Kilmeade's radio show, which we carry here on WLEA. They were playing. Brian Kilmeade was playing clips of the Tuesday press conference with Josh Earnest, and it was kind of an interesting thing. Kilmeade highlighted the clips of the reporters, especially Jonathan Karl at ABC, who could not believe that the president was that the White House spokesman was trying to, how should I say it, distance the recent attacks in France from the fact that at the cafe, from the fact that it was a kosher cafe. And then he came out, Ernest came out the next day and said, oh, no, it was an attack, it was anti-Semitic. But during the press conference, he didn't seem to say that. This particular president, President Obama, has had probably the worst relationship with Israel of any president since the founding of Israel in the 1940s. Dr. Koff, do you know why that is?
Well, he has a very strong commitment and belief that the Islamic world can be won over to peaceful interaction with the rest of the world using diplomacy and goodwill, and he therefore does not want to criticize them, and he blames Israel for constantly stirring the pot, because Israel feels that it's the Palestinians and Al-Qaeda and the whole set of these other groups that are stirring the pot. And the president has had terrible relations with Israel, though he always claims how much he loves them and supports it. And probably in his heart he thinks he does. He thinks that a peaceful Near East would be a safer Near East for Israel. And that, of course, is by definition true. The problem is that he doesn't like criticism of Islam, and the people of Israel and the government, especially of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu and his Likud party, feel that he is letting them down time after time by de facto favoring the Islamic element over the Jewish element, even though in his explicit statements there is no positive criticism of Israel, but there is a refusal to criticize Islam, which has now become part of his persona. And the people of Israel, they notice what he's not saying. Let's put it that way. in a way.
Well, we talk about Obama and Israel. There was some of that with Bill Clinton, but it's nothing compared with the Obama administration, the tension between the White House and Israel. And Obama recently made a statement which ruffled a lot of conservatives. He made a statement about how, in defending Islam, he said, the Crusades are nothing to write home about, was basically what he was saying. Your thoughts on that statement, Dr. Kopp?
Yes, the president went to the National Prayer Banquet and said Christians shouldn't get on their high horse because terrible were things during the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. And sort of expected the Monty Python crew to come out from the back going, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. His statements about the Crusades were typical 19th century chatter. They are still standard propaganda that the Crusades were an aggressive act to conquer the Near East, to colonialize the Near East, on and on. The scholarship in the Crusades has been massive over the past generation, especially the past 20 years, and it's shown again and again that the Crusades were the impulse behind them. This isn't to defend every individual action, but the impulse behind them was the opposite of jihad, that they were set up to defend pilgrims and to the Near East and Christians in the Near East, that just as pilgrimage to Mecca is a major part of Islam, pilgrimages in Christianity, especially medieval Christianity, were a major part of the religion, and the Crusaders were there to protect Christians and to protect non-jihadi Muslims, in fact, in many cases. This doesn't mean they didn't do bad things, of course, but the impulse is completely the opposite of what he says. It was a response to militant Islam then, as militant Islam still exists today. And it's not a modern invention. It's part of an Islamic tradition that goes all the way back to Muhammad and was very strong in the Middle Ages.
We're talking with Dr. Christian Koff, University of Colorado in Boulder. When we get back, we'll get Dr. Koff's take on the new poll out where Elizabeth Warren tops Hillary Clinton in Iowa. Also, Jon Stewart stepping down from Comedy Central, and an FCC commissioner complaining that the White House is putting a lot of pressure on the FCC to rule certain ways. Back in just a moment. On the Newsmaker Show today, Brian O'Neill on with our regular Thursday guest, Dr. Christian Koff. Dr. Koff, Jon Stewart stepping down from the Comedy Central show. A lot of news outlets led with that as soon as that was the top story for a lot of news outlets. Your thoughts on Jon Stewart? Why would he do this?
It's a really great question because Jon Stewart is very much admired and trusted by what's called the demographic, the 18 to 35-year-old crew, and indeed he's often called the most trusted news source in that group, with Brian Williams being number two. And his stepping down is quite dramatic. He's been a very effective force for the Empower left now for a long time. My own interpretation, which I have not heard elsewhere, but I've often seen in academia, is that Stephen Colbert's promotion to replace David Letterman has really hurt him, that he, mentored Colbert, fostered his career, promoted him, has really helped him become a major figure. And then when this very prestigious position opened up to replace the Letterman show, here was on CBS, which is a very big network, that it went to the person he had supported and grown up, not to him. And I think he just can't sort of take being on Comedy Central anymore, which, although he's the most popular show on Comedy Central, or certainly one of them, it's nothing like being on, network television. And I think that he just feels, I need to do something else. He recently produced and directed a movie. I think he wants to do anything else but be in a situation where he's reminded that Stephen Colbert is going to be on every night for a major network, and he would still be there rolling his eyes when, Brian Kilmeade or Sean Hannity says something.
Just a thought. Colbert's sister got into politics. Do you think there's any slight chance that a Jon Stewart would?
I think that Jon Stewart would be in a very good situation to build a political career in New York. New York has increasingly been a safe seat for the Democrats. I'm so old, I remember when our senators were split and our congressmen were split between the two parties, and there even were liberal and conservative parties that would try and sway the two parties one way or another. And yes, I think it's very likely that he would choose that. We do know he's interested in movies, and he might choose to become a director and producer, which is a way to make a lot of money in this world too. But I think that his political popularity with the segment that would get him elected, sometime, one of these safe seats is going to come up, and he would be a strong candidate for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people might laugh when you say that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Run, Warren, run. Elizabeth Warren tops Hillary Clinton in Iowa poll, even though Warren says she doesn't want to do it.
Well, it's all these people on the Republican side trying so hard to get people to come out for them. Here's Elizabeth Warren running away from the position, and she's more popular than the person who not only is running for it. Hillary has basically assumed she has it. It's typically assumed when the next presidential election is discussed for 2016 that some Republican will run against Hillary Clinton. And those of us whose memories go back to 2008 remember the same scenario. And Barack Obama tried very hard to get the position. Elizabeth Warren is running away. But Hillary is, there was a wonderful English essayist called Max Beerbohm, and his comment about George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright, was, Shaw has no enemies, but none of his friends like him. And Hillary Clinton fits that description. Within the Democratic Party, she does not have enemies. But there's nobody enthusiastic about her except for her husband. And there are a lot of people who feel she's too closely tied to Wall Street. She gets very large sums of money from Goldman Sachs every month to give them her little talks. People would really like to see somebody who represents their views a lot better than, and their feelings, I think, more than views. Because no one would doubt that Hillary would do an articulate job of defending their views, but would like to see someone who they really feel belongs to their side and, to quote her husband's famous comment, feels their pain.
What about Chelsea stepping up to the political plate at some point in a real and serious way? Do you think that's possible?
Yes. Among the scandals of NBC News was their hiring Chelsea Clinton, who just sort of walked around and held microphones up to people and otherwise did things that anybody could do. There was no special attribute there. Chelsea is very smart. She's had a great education. She's married into a political family. I think both her in-laws were in Congress at one stage. The dad actually going to jail for what he did while he was there. She's lively and intelligent. I personally think she needs a lot more experience. That's my own opinion. Yeah, presumably someday, this would be the dream, of course, is have Hillary in 2016 for 8 years, and then maybe Chelsea would be ready to run.
There are some who seem to think that if there was a Jeb-Hillary race for the White House, that the conservative Tea Party element would stay home and the Democrats would win because there would be a big turnout for Hillary.
Well, people talk that way. I think there are a lot of Democrats discussed with Hillary. Hillary looks much better on paper. She's a terrible campaigner. She's very arrogant. She won't listen to the advice of her staff. So she'll make a lot of mistakes when she's running, whoever runs against her. Jeb's a pretty good campaigner. His best strength is that he's a very honest person, but it's also his greatest weakness because he is a moderate liberal, and he's not extreme, but he's a moderate liberal, and his views on immigration, Common Core, and all the rest of it would discourage conservatives, unless there was some way of getting across that he would not put his deepest beliefs into effect when he was president, and I don't think he'd do that because he believes sincerely in his beliefs. Hillary probably sincerely believes in her beliefs, but she's not really able to articulate them very well. And I think it would be a battle of the Titans as to who would win in that particular race. It might be a little bit like the end of Rocky II, where there's a double knockout.
Dr. Koff, before we go, You know, it's occurred to me that everybody else is talking about Brian Williams. I remember somebody in communications class, one of the professors said, if everybody's doing it, don't overdo it, but you should address it. So here goes. Brian Williams stepping down from NBC.
Every real expert in the media was convinced that this would go away after 2 days, that it was an unimportant issue. But the fact is, Americans do not trust the broadcast news, the mainstream media, and they have seen, it's not so much the individual fact, which is not a trivial one, that he perpetually lies and fantasizes about what he's been through, but the fact that American people do not trust the mainstream media, and this crystallized for them what they disliked about it. And it's one thing. Actually, is a member of my family who was suffered very mild dementia. She was in Colorado when the Pope visited here many years ago and saw him on television, and she still insists that she met the Pope and that he was a very nice man and had a great sense of humor and things like this. And no one blames her because, you know, this problem does arise. It's very mild in her case. But this guy he makes up his own life story and then tells it as though it were true. And for a lot of Americans, that's what's wrong with the media. They have a narrative. They tell the narrative. They don't care about the facts. And that's a very serious problem. And Brian Williams represents that, a person who tells the story the way it ought to be, not the way the facts say it. And that's what bothers so many Americans.
Dr. Christian Koff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Any final thoughts before we go?
My final thought is going to be borrowed from Conan O'Brien for once, who said, NBC is looking at someone to replace Brian Williams. They're talking about Tom Brokaw coming back. But if he doesn't, they're in trouble because their number 2 most trusted person is Bill Cosby.
Dr. Koff, thanks for joining us.
Great to talk to you, Brian.